everybody, and welcome to Starting Fresh in 2025, Managing Your Divorce with Confidence. My name is Jackie Otero, and I'm a Florida Supreme Court certified family mediator. And I'm joined tonight by Lee Wright, who's a certified divorce coach. We thought it would be great to join forces for this webinar because we're bringing together both the logistic side of divorce with mediation, as well as the emotional side of divorce, which is what the divorce coach covers. So we are here to answer your questions. We also have pre-written questions that we're going to start off asking each other. But then anytime you want to ask us something, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. And we're happy to get to as many of your questions as we can tonight in this 1 hour that we have together. As a disclaimer up front, I want to mention that we cannot give you any legal advice. So please do not consider anything we say tonight to be legal advice. This is for informational purposes only. Lee and I also will be happy to share some of our own anecdotes because we've both been through our own divorces. So you'll hear both some personal, sides of our stories as well as from our professional experience. So at the beginning of this webinar, we did have a very slight technical glitch, so we missed the first minute of Lee's introduction. So I'm going to jump right back into the webinar when Lee is discussing why people seek out a divorce coach. Enjoy. And stay till the end because we have a special offer that we're giving to anybody who views this webinar.
So, as I was saying, just figuring out what's the best divorce approach. A coach can help you with that. Coaches definitely do a lot of helping you process your emotions. Obviously, there's grief and a lot of other emotions that come into play during divorce. And so we provide support, but we're also there to celebrate your wins, help you stay accountable to what you say you're going to be doing, or some people get almost like deer in headlights and they just need someone to kind of keep pushing them along. We provide perspective because we have been there and we know what it's like, and we also have seen the other side, so we can help you keep things in perspective. Uh, if people have lawyers, lawyers are really expensive. So I can help people really think through their questions so that they use their expensive professionals effectively, and they're not using them as a sounding board or a support mechanism. Like I know friends who did that and ended up with astronomical bills. So, and the holding accountable, we will also hold you accountable to stay in your best self. Like sometimes when you're in it, like you can't see the trees through the forest, whichever way it goes. And so you start sometimes like getting like a dog on a bone, not letting go of something that maybe is not that important to hold on to because the emotions are in there. So we can help you like realize when you're starting to maybe hurt your own self in the process. And then lastly, just really helping you focus on the fact that you probably are going to have to co-parent with this person. So how to start to establish that relationship, set healthy boundaries, what a good parenting plan might look like, and help think through that, and what are your priorities in a settlement and a parenting plan, what things aren't that important to you, so that when you do go meet with a mediator or working with your attorney, you've done some of that self-reflection and you're not just, again, deer in headlights, like I have no idea. So I guess that is a good overview of how a divorce coach would help you.
Yeah, that's great. And, I think about having any kind of mental health professional alongside you during your divorce. I mean, I know I was going to therapy during my divorce, but a therapist, I love therapists, but they
Mhm.
also don't give you like a roadmap. It's more
Yes.
about helping you figure out, how to get yourself to a healthy place. Where sometimes when you're going through a process like divorce, you want somebody who can just help you like set goals and tell you what to do next,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It
A lot
seems
of
like that
times
might be the benefit
therapy,
of having a coach.
for sure. Like therapy, a lot of times is looking back, what happened? How'd I get
Right.
here? And coaching, a lot of times, is much more forward looking and what are my next steps? And how do I uh, not make the same mistakes again. So learn from them.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times, most of my clients do have therapists and still have me, and we work with them differently.
Mhm. That makes sense. So, before somebody considers filing for divorce or hiring a lawyer, what kinds of things would you advise that they do, before taking that next step?
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to start having an open dialogue with your significant other before you split and just go hire a professional. I think I encourage my clients to try to make the relationship work in every way possible with couples therapy and doing their own self therapy to see if maybe they need to work on themselves and find joy within themselves, learn how to create healthy boundaries, and see if there's anything that can keep the relationship together. And if not, then having some conversations with their partner about this isn't working. And I'll help them think through how to have those conversations where they can start to talk about the priorities and values that they want in place if they do have to like consciously uncouple rather than completely like sending all responsibility to other professionals like lawyers to handle every conversation. Like this is your family, it's your co-parent. You guys are going to have to work together or not work together at all, which then really hurts the kids. So be adults at the front end and have some of these uncomfortable but hard conversations so that you can kind of set a baseline of how do we want to do this? What divorce approach is best for us? Is a collaborative divorce better or working just with a mediator? Like you can have those conversations with your spouse and come to an agreement rather than someone hires an attorney, the other person reacts and attorneys up themselves, and all of a sudden you're like in an acrimonious situation.
And it can turn that way so quick. It's like as
So
soon as one person gets scared and hires a lawyer and then they start sending scary letters to them, it's like throwing a grenade into the process.
it's really almost impossible to come back.
Mhm.
Whereas if you have these conversations and then you hire a mediator and try and mediate and it falls apart and then you escalate to getting attorneys, well, you did try everything. But if you get attorneys and then you're like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. We're like at war. I
Mm,
want to de-escalate. Maybe we could just go to a mediator. It's chances are it's never going to happen that way. So
right.
you have to be careful. The way you start sets the tone for what it's gonna, the trajectory of this whole thing. It can take on a life of its own. So being very careful what you do in the beginning is so important.
I would say too, something that I see happen along those same lines is I'm in a lot of divorce groups on Facebook and
Mhm.
social media. And woo, those places get really hot. They get very heated, very contentious. And it's like sometimes people will just ask for advice just because they're looking for somebody to talk to. And you can post anonymously, but then
Mhm.
the army comes out and it feels like all these wounded people come out and they're like, take them for everything you've got. And, like
Yes.
lawyer up immediately, get the most aggressive lawyer in town. Like it's just like hack
No.
mode. And
Yes.
I'm convinced that you can do it differently than that. Like, and I know some situations are out of your control, but like you can control how you approach it. And if you
Hmm.
can try to at least put a little ego aside and just
Hmm.
try to start things off amicably,
For
you see
sure.
how far you can get, just like what you're saying. There are other options down the road if agreements are not made.
Absolutely.
But why go
Yeah.
straight to that if you don't have to?
I know. I feel like, even if like some of my clients, they both have attorneys by the time they come to me. And the attorneys are like encouraged, they're still living under the same roof, and the attorneys are encouraging them not to talk to each other about anything related to
Right.
it. And I say like you have to co-parent with this person. If you have an opinion and you want to bounce ideas off of them in a very healthy, calm way, like when you guys are in a good place, like you happen to agree that you're going to have a conversation, like you can make a lot of progress or agree, like, yes, we really do want to finish in mediation and just try and get on the same page. The attorneys are not there for the duration of your lifespan, whereas you two have each other if you have kids together.
Hmm.
So just working on seeing each other, seeing your ex is not the enemy. And it gets really hard. I mean, there's no doubt divorce is hard, but the way you show up and the way that you expect things to go affects the way things go.
Hmm.
The one other thing, like if you are hiring attorneys, I always encourage my clients to, one of the questions they ask their attorneys is just, how can I communicate with you? Some attorneys are so busy and they have so many cases that you only get to speak to their paralegal and it's only through email. And let's say you have four questions and you send an email and the paralegal answers two, and then you get the email back, and then you send the other two, and then you get a response, but you don't understand something. So, and now you've got 8 or 10 emails going back and forth, and then she needs to confirm or he needs to confirm with the lawyer. And sometimes I think if people ask their lawyers, can I set up a 5 minute phone call with you within 48 hours if I want to speak to you and not work with you through email and through your paralegal? I think it's much more efficient and uses your money much more effectively, but it's important to ask the lawyer before you hire them if that's something they will make time for or work with.
Hmm. I'm going to ask you one more question for now, but I have a lot more I could ask you, so we can always come
Sure.
back to them. Is there any kind of like sample exercise that you would recommend to people to help them manage the whole emotional stress side of divorce?
So when I start working with clients at the beginning, I do something called a best self exercise. And we go through, it's not a long exercise. They can even do it on their own and then meet with me just to discuss their results. But it kind of sets your baseline of how you want to show up. And you recognize your tendencies, whether it's like to catastrophize or to go to yelling when you get stressed, and identify those so that they're in your perceptual set. So when you see yourself gravitating toward that behavior, you can pause and get that like reptilian brain to calm down and breathe the 90 seconds it takes to get that frontal cortex to come back online. And just doing this baseline exercise at the beginning can really help you change your behavior. And then, a relationship's a feedback loop. So if you change the way you behave, your partner is going to change the way they react. And part of fights is the same loop because it's a rut that you both have fallen to your triggers. But if you start to make a conscious effort to change your initiation, then it can change the response, and that can make a really big difference.
Yes, I feel that so much. I feel like so many people, because like you said, this is such an emotional experience to go through. And it's like
Mhm.
if you get one text message that feels insulting or it feels degrading or disrespectful, you want to return that energy and then some, like
Yeah.
that's like our instinct. You just want to, and it's like you have to find a way to step out of that and
Hmm.
be the de-escalator because it's only
Exactly.
going to help you coming from a mediation perspective. It's only going to help you in a settlement to de-escalate the
Yeah.
situation and try to take some of the emotions out of it. I know you and I have talked about this before where you have to treat it like it's a business transaction. And I know it
Mhm.
doesn't feel that way at all. Like I've never had this emotional of a business transaction, but really
Right.
at the end of the day, that's what a marriage is. It's a legal entity. It
Hmm.
and all of the marital assets and debts that you have incurred, it's all part of that history of that business.
Yes.
When you get divorced, it's dividing that business. And
Exactly.
so even if you can just bite your tongue, sit on your hands, do whatever you need to do, or even like write that heated text message back, but send it to your best friend
Right.
or to your divorce coach or whoever it is. Like send it to somebody else and get it out of
Hmm.
your system, you know?
Yes.
But don't be part of that escalation if you can at all help it, because
Yeah.
it's not going to help. It's not going to help your divorce at all.
It's not going to help your divorce. It's not going to help your co-parenting relationship post-divorce. It's not helping your kids. Like if your kids' parents can't communicate together, can't be in the same room together at their graduation, at their birthday parties, and what have you, like if you destroy your co-parenting relationship because of bad behavior during the divorce, you are hurting your children. So every time things escalate, you have to remind yourself, like, what is best for my kids? How can I change my behavior so that I'm doing right by my kids? Because they didn't choose divorce. And divorce isn't the worst thing in the world for kids. I do not mean that at all. A very bad divorce where the parents act really badly can be damaging to the kids. Divorce itself, no.
Mhm. Yeah, good points. All right, Lee, let's go to the mediation side of things for a few questions and then we'll open it up. And you all that are listening, if you want to put in a question at any time in the Q&A box, you're more than welcome to, and we'll get to those next.
Okay, great. So, when someone is thinking about mediation, what is the process look like? What is it that they should expect?
Sure. So I do all pro se mediations. So that means self-represented. That means people who don't have lawyers are coming to me. I kind of just fell into that niche because people see that I'm not an attorney, and people who are avoiding attorneys tend to find me and come to me. So my biggest recommendation, if I was going to do my divorce all over again, I would say to anybody, try to do an uncontested divorce. It is so much quicker and easier to get through the court system if you have an agreement already in place. So those are sort of my favorite mediations to do where they're before you file for divorce. So there's not even an active case, but the parties have decided we want to give mediation a try and see if we can settle everything before we even file. So if you file a contested divorce, you're going to get assigned a judge. You're going to have to serve your ex-spouse. They're going to have to file a response or a counter petition. And there's a big back and forth that goes through. Then you're going to have a hearing. Then you're going to get ordered to mediation. Like there's this whole process that you have to go
Yes.
through. And in the state of Florida, um, all the courts do mandate mediation if you have a
Mhm.
contested divorce.
Yeah.
So, and it can be a long process to get through that whole court system in a contested divorce. If you file uncontested, that means you already have a settlement agreement, you already have a parenting plan, you have put the signatures on those papers, and you file them together.
Yeah.
I have seen a divorce get approved by a judge in 1 week. Like it
Uh-huh.
goes real fast when you just say, "Hey, we've already settled everything and we just want to move forward with this."
Yes.
So that I think is kind of, if there's an ideal way to, have a divorce, that's kind of the
Yes.
ideal way to do it for me. Um, in my divorce, we did have attorneys and went through mediation. So, I mean, that was kind of like the simplest way to do it with attorneys.
Hmm.
Um, but if you are fairly amicable, you can come to a mediator like me and I can facilitate the entire process for you.
Hmm.
The catch is, I cannot give you any legal advice and I cannot strategize for you. So that's you're kind of your own advocate when you don't have an attorney present in mediation. Some
Yeah.
people feel really comfortable advocating for themselves, some people do not.
Hmm.
So, usually, what I recommend is what I'll do is I'll send potential clients a mediation questionnaire. So they have a list of all the topics that we're going to talk about in mediation because I don't want people to feel surprised, like
Hmm.
and unprepared. So I'll send them a whole list. Here's everything we're going to talk about in this mediation, every part of the parenting plan, every part of the settlement agreement. And I want them to be prepared, have numbers at their fingertips. If we're talking about bank accounts or 401ks, I want them to know what's in those accounts. Be ready because you don't want to waste time paying for a mediator while you're looking up, account balances.
Hmm.
So taking that mediation questionnaire and kind of going through and having all that information handy, but then also kind of knowing, well, where do I think the points of contention are going to be? And what are the things that we already agree on? Because a lot
Mhm.
of people agree on like 90% of this stuff already.
Mhm.
And then there's a few hot button issues where they get caught up in, but that's where I'm the referee to the
Mhm.
to the situation and I can talk to people, see, what are the root motivations that are driving people, try to see where there might be room for compromise. And the great thing about it is I do all my mediations on Zoom. So I have a mute button, which I love, and I also have breakout rooms that I can use. So I try to start people mediating together in the same Zoom room. But as soon
Mhm.
as things get messy, I can say, let's take a break and go to separate rooms. I'm going to talk to each of you separately. That
Yeah.
way I can go talk to you, Lee, in a separate room and I can say, so what's going on with this issue? Why are we going in
Mhm.
circles here? What are you scared of here? Or
Yeah.
what am I missing? Right? So I'll just ask a lot of questions. And sometimes that's when they uncover, oh, well, here's actually what I'm trying to do here. And so
Mhm.
whatever I talk to, either client in a private room, that's still confidential. I'm not going to share what you told me when we get back to the other person. So
Yes.
that's the other big part of mediation. It is a confidential process.
Mhm.
Means everything that we cover in a mediation session is confidential. You can't, you can't use it in court later on, or nobody can use anything you said in mediation against you later on. It's supposed to be a contained, confidential process to try to see if a resolution can be found.
Yeah. I think that's you provided so much great information. I think a few things to note is so if people have attorneys in Florida, like you said, you have to mediate. So you before a judge will see you and agree to help you work on your divorce, you have to at least have gone through one mediation.
Right.
And like for my divorce, we both had lawyers. So we sat there for a day with paying both our lawyers and an expensive mediator. And honestly, his lawyer, he stopped listening to because he hired a terrible lawyer. I had done so much research and kind of had thought through what I thought was fair. My lawyer sat there on his phone all day, and we spent a crap ton of money, and we had a really good mediator. And she did a shuttle mediation, so it was pre-COVID. She was going back and forth from the rooms. And honestly, when I look back, like all we needed was her, a mediator. And I think a lot of people they have this misperception that you can't mediate if you don't have lawyers or there's so many permutations. People can work with someone like you and come up with a mediation uh, outcome and then take it to consulting attorneys and
Yeah.
each have their own consulting attorney to look at the draft. And so it's not like you don't have an attorney, but you're
Right.
not paying an attorney to sit there in mediation with you. So there's so many ways and like ways that you can mediate that I think people going into divorce do not know about.
And I love that option of I'll tell people, before you sign an agreement, have your own independent counsel look it over. So
Yeah.
what you could do, hypothetically, you could go meet for a consultation with an attorney. You could pay somebody for, a 30-minute or 1 hour consultation without hiring them on retainer. Just
Yeah.
get some initial information from them. Learn a little bit about the Florida statutes that are going to govern your divorce. Learn about, the presumption of 50-50 time sharing for parents.
Mhm.
Learn about equitable distribution. The more you are familiar with the process, I mean, I know nobody wants to learn all this stuff about family law, but it's
Exactly.
empowering when you understand more about the process. So if
It
you consult
is.
with an attorney first, then go to a mediator, start hashing out an agreement. Then you can take that agreement back to an attorney for another consult and just say, I just want to pay you to look over this agreement and give me your feedback. So I
Exactly.
mean, there are ways to do it without paying all the astronomical fees to have an attorney with you at every step of the process.
Exactly. And I think the empowering aspect, you can advocate for yourself and for your family. Your family is changing. But it's still a family. It's just going to be in a different shape. I like people to think of it like that. And so you don't want to just hand off all the decision making to these professionals who have a lot of other cases on their, like, they do not have to live with this agreement for the rest of their lives. And so taking responsibility and advocating for yourself and doing some research and choosing the right professionals to help you will ensure that you end up with a result that you are feel like is fair and something you can live with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a little kind of cheat sheet acronym when you're thinking about topics in mediation and topics to prepare for. Mediators use the acronym PEACE, and it stands for Parenting Plan, Equitable Distribution, Alimony, Child Support, and then everything else. Those are kind of your five major categories that you talk about in mediation. I always start with the parenting plan just because, I feel like it's a little bit easier to get some wins when you're
Hmm.
talking about parenting because usually everybody can agree on one thing as a default, and that is we want what's best for our child.
Hmm.
Like if there's going to be anything to agree on, usually that's a good starting point. And so I like to go through the whole parenting plan first before we even touch finances
Hmm.
because people can co-parent well and then things blow up when you get to finances. And it can go vice versa. It can go either
Yeah.
way. But after the parenting plan, then we move into equitable distribution, which is how are you going to divide up the marital assets and debts? And one way to look at it is like we talked about, like your marriage being a business entity. What is the net worth of this business? So if you think of your marriage as a business, what's the net worth of it? So how much debt do you have? How many assets do you have? Anything that was incurred during the marriage, that's considered a marital asset or debt. So once you can kind of come up with an approximate figure of what is that net worth of the marriage, you're going to have to figure out how to divide it. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly 50-50 because when you go to mediation, you can agree on whatever you want. So some people might be more emotionally attached to their 401k. Some people might be more emotionally attached to a home, a property. So it doesn't have to be even split down the middle, but equitable meaning a fair distribution of those assets and debts. So we go through that and then we get into alimony. It's interesting because I find in most mediations, people know that either there is going to be alimony or there's not going to be alimony. They don't necessarily know how much it's going to be, but they usually agree that it's either being talked about or not. If it is being talked about, but they don't know where to start, while I can't give legal advice, I can pull up the Florida statutes. So I'll even screen share and I'll pull up the Florida statute under alimony and we'll look at it together. And because it gives you an outline, this is the maximum amount that a court can award based on how long the marriage was, based on the need of one party and the ability of the other party to pay. So, I mean, it does kind of give you a starting point and it caps it out at how much that could be. So
Hmm.
that's one area where I do give people homework sometimes. If they don't know where to start with alimony, I might tell them, go get a consult with an attorney and then come back and tell me, tell us what you think. So that's PEA. C is child support. Child support is set by Florida statute. It's not meant to be negotiable between the parties. So child support is meant to be a benefit on behalf of the child. So that's the way the court views it. The court views it as they are awarding it for the benefit of the child, not to penalize or reward one parent. So there is a set calculation for child support in the state of Florida. Now, you can ask the court to, award something different than what the calculator says. And I think if it's a negligible amount, if it's a small amount difference, that can go through. If you're asking for a huge difference in child support, a little bit harder to make that case. So what I do is in my settlement agreement, if the parties want to agree on a different amount than the calculation, I'll put that request right in the settlement agreement for the judge to review. And then the E of peace is everything else at the end. So that could be anything from like, what are we going to do with the pets? Right? Some people are arguing over who's taking the dog. I mean, that's one of the babies of the family, right? Some people are, wanting to talk about how are we going to file our taxes? How are we going to handle life insurance? Like, there's a lot of kind of miscellaneous topics
Yeah.
that also can go into that settlement agreement. So that's kind of the overview of the different range of topics that we go through.
Hmm. And we've talked before about the pro se checklist. Can you kind of give people an idea of what that looks like or what it is?
Sure. So I like to refer people to Seminole County's Pro Se checklist. They have it available to the public. Every family law form that you need is available through the Florida courts website. So if
Mhm.
you want to file your own divorce, all the paperwork is there. It just can be very daunting because there's a lot of forms. And so, what I like about Seminole County's checklist is they have a button that you can choose that says marriage with no children, dissolution of marriage with children, or paternity only, no marriage. And you can click on that checklist, and it gives you all the forms that you need to file, and it gives you a link to download that form directly from the Florida courts website. So I use that all the time because, well, I did file my divorce in Seminole County and I filed it myself. So I just find it to be a very handy checklist. What I can also help people do is I can help direct them based on that checklist, which ones they need for their case. So I do offer that as well. So if we complete the mediation and we have an agreement and everything's ready to go, I'll then kind of coach them through that whole filing process. So I'll help them download all the files that they need. They can fill them out. If they have questions, I can help them too. And then I can show them the e-filing process and get it all initiated for them.
And how does like a situation like yours, this pro se with a mediator, what are the price difference to like what it costs when you have attorneys involved?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's much cheaper when you don't have attorneys involved, as you can imagine. I mean, I'll give you an example of what my divorce cost because I had a pretty cheap divorce and we had attorneys and we did one mediation and we settled. So
Mhm.
I had to, this is very low end, right? Because we didn't have like a ton of complicated issues to resolve. I
Mhm.
paid an initial $3,000 retainer to my attorney. I don't know what he paid for his, but I'll assume it's probably in that same ballpark. We did one mediation. It was 5 hours long. So we paid a mediator $300 an hour. We split that. So we each pay 150 an hour for the mediator. We
Mhm.
did pay our attorneys, coming out of that retainer. And then the filing fees are around $400 to file
Mhm.
a petition in our local counties. So, I mean, I would say it ends up being about $4,000 each. And
Mhm.
that's for
And
a
that's a
simple.
really inexpensive divorce.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like that's a simple divorce with
Yes.
representation.
Yes.
Um, like that's about as simple as it gets when you get attorneys involved. So I consider myself lucky. Now,
Mhm.
with the mediations that I do without attorneys, there are some that I can settle in one session, like one 3 hour session.
Mhm.
And the parties just split the cost of the mediator. So I do an hourly rate. I do charge an hourly rate of 300 an hour, which is pretty standard market rate for mediators. But I also have a sliding scale. So it's based on your income. So if you make under, if you're a bit lower income, it's that hourly rate can be adjusted based on your income. So I'm always happy to give that to people to take a look at if they feel that, that would benefit them. I also offer mediation packages, so it's kind of flat fee. You purchase a bundle of hours.
Mhm.
You've got me for 5 hours. And it's a
Right.
little bit of a discount from the standard rate. So I mean, I like to offer people options. I mean, certainly they can pay as they go.
Yeah.
Um, but any way you slice it, splitting the cost of one mediator, um,
Mhm.
even like my longer mediations end up going like two sessions, let's say 6 to 8 hours total.
Mhm.
That's still way cheaper than having
Way.
representation on both sides.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we have a question that I want to go to. And for those of you listening, you're welcome to enter in more questions. So, question is, what route do you take when the other party is just stonewalling, have been an obstructionist and abusing the legal system? So, Lee, do you want to tackle that one? What would you advise in that kind of situation?
So that is a very difficult situation. Stonewalling where they just won't respond or they are dragging their feet with everything can be really challenging for the other partner because you try from every angle. That I think is almost harder sometimes than dealing with someone who's aggressive or absolutely very difficult to work with. I think it depends. If you don't have attorneys, then I think possibly getting a third party involved to almost like a mediator or a coach to help you sit down and be an objective third party is one possible approach. Because if they're stonewalling, that means they're not responding to you. But if you can get a third party involved that isn't an attorney or someone that they look at as an opposing side, that is one possible route. The one thing that I have to say is every divorce is unique, every family situation is unique, and there is not like one fit all answer to any situation. It's so tailored, like coaching is so tailored to that person's situation. And the lawyer that they have hired and the lawyer that their ex has hired creates the dynamic that creates the train down that track. And so I, without more specifics, it's really hard to give an answer to that.
I would say too, from a mediation perspective, sometimes people do arrive to mediation on their best behavior. I have seen that happen before where people are quite contentious, but they're motivated by saving the money, which is why they're not going after each other and trying to take each other to court because going to trial is extremely expensive. So maybe that's something that could appeal to them, even if they want to fight. But if they don't want to spend a lot of money, you could potentially convince them to try mediation. When they get in front of me, they usually are on their best behavior because I can separate them. I can talk to them individually. I can keep you guys completely separated and just see if I can. The good thing is, when I'm in separate rooms with people, I can also, you know, act very sympathetic to everybody. And if you don't see me acting real sympathetic to your ex, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel like I'm on their side because I'm not taking sides. I'm just trying to get people to talk to me because the more I get them to talk about the issues, the more I can kind of work on them to suggest potential compromises. So I
Yeah.
still think mediation is, it could potentially work even with an obstructionist type of person. The thing is, if they're not agreeable to trying to, mediate or do anything to move the process along, you pretty much have to just file and get that clock ticking because they do have a certain amount of time that they have to respond within. Otherwise, you can get a default divorce. So, like, they have to respond at some point. One thing that can help is you can always, once you have an active case, you can request a case management conference with your judge. And so that's not a hearing. It's just like a progress report. It's like a little check-in. And I've sat in on these case management conferences, and attorneys request them all the time. But I think pro se people who are representing themselves, they don't always know that they can request that.
Mhm.
Request a case management conference with your judge. You can go through their judicial assistant. That's all public information. You can find the contact info for their judicial assistant, reach out to them and just say, I'd like to schedule a case management conference. They're going to require the other person to attend, and they're going to straight up ask, why haven't you given each other your financial affidavits yet? Why haven't you started a time sharing plan yet with your kids? Like, use the judge to call them out because the judge will set timelines. They'll say, I'm going to give you 30 days to get a temporary parenting plan in place. And if they don't follow that, let's say you schedule a mediation, they don't show up or something like that. So 30 days passes, the judge can hold them in contempt. So, I mean, while you don't want to get wrapped up in the court system, you can also use it in kind of, in the obstructionist example to help move things along. A little bit more painful that way, but I mean, it's kind of nice sometimes when a judge will, give them a little lecture and tell them what they need to do to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. I also think a lot of times I've seen clients, they're struggling, their attorneys are fighting, filing motions back and forth, and just getting to the mediation table helps start the process to actually start taking shape, where both partners can start to see, like, oh my gosh, this could have an end date if we work with this mediator. Whereas before, it's just this like legal mumbo jumbo, and you feel like there's how does this ever even culminate? So the faster, the sooner you can get to a mediation date, if you have attorneys, the better to actually get things actually starting to feel tangible. And
Mhm.
it's crazy how sometimes it takes months after you've hired attorneys to actually get a mediation date. And that all that time is time where things can go wrong. Someone pisses the other one off and
Mhm.
wants to make, isn't giving enough money. And now the lawyers, they're like, oh, I want to file a motion to get more money. And like again, it things escalate. Whereas if you could have gone to the mediation table before some of that happened, like things were kind of at a better, lower escalation point. So the sooner you can get to mediation, the better.
Mhm. All right, a few more details coming out. Divorce case has been ongoing since 2023, has not progressed. The other party has even canceled a settlement conference. Yeah, I would stay on the judicial assistant in that case to say, I want to progress this divorce. What else can we do? Because I mean, I see judges come down on people all the time when they are having that progress check. So I mean, it sounds like this kind of person needs a lot of deadlines and some lectures from a judge to keep things moving, unfortunately. Says canceling the settlement conference, saying he couldn't afford legal fees but wants to go to trial. Yeah, a little bit of an oxymoron there.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I mean, I hear all kinds of stuff in these mediations. Sometimes time does help. I mean, the thing is, time moves so slowly when you're going through a divorce. It's like 6 months feels like forever. I have seen people go to mediation and not agree on a single thing, and then 6 months later they try again and they settle. So it's like sometimes people just like honestly give up a little bit on the process and they're sort of like they're running out of like time to torture their ex-spouse and it's like we're all moving on here. So I mean hopefully time helps the situation too, but I know that's really tough. It sounds like that's the kind of situation where you do need a lawyer to get involved and to really start setting those deadlines through the court, force them to keep moving.
Yeah. I know I have some clients who have lawyers and it nothing moves. Like it's crazy hearing how slow things can go if you have an ex with a lawyer who doesn't want things to move very quickly. And it's just unfortunate because, again, like the kids are being hurt. Like the longer you're at war, like the partner or the spouse who's dragging their feet and making it not move, they need to be reminded that like you're hurting the kids. Like you need to love your kids more than you hate your ex and put your kids first. And putting your kids first means getting this to conclusion so everybody can start to create their new normal and have a fresh starting point and create some norms and routines again. And that happens once you settle and can move on.
Here's a question for you, Lee. How much does a divorce coach cost? And how do you know if a divorce coach is qualified and reputable? So, how is that regulated?
So for one, you definitely want someone who's certified. There are some people who, go through divorce and then decide they're a coach. So finding someone who's certified, the CDC is the biggest, most recognized certified program for divorce coaches. And you can go onto their website and they have a directory, so you can find coaches there. And there are some coaches who specialize more in co-parenting or high conflict divorce. So there's people who have specialties. I think it's really important to find someone who you feel like you have a good rapport with, who you can open up to and you feel comfortable with. There's a range in fees. It probably goes from about 70 a session to 180 a session, depending on the coach. And some coaches do a lot of one-on-one work. Some coaches do group work. I do one-on-one, but I prefer to do group work these days because I feel like it's much more cost effective and you co-evolve, like so you learn from each other and it's really nice to help other people. So I really like working in groups, but I do one-on-one as well. You just honestly have to interview a few coaches and find one that feels the right fit for you with the right price point.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you're asking specifically for divorce coaches, but I'll answer for mediators too. So I would always make sure that you're working with a certified mediator that is certified by the state Supreme Court that you are located in. So in the state of Florida, you have to be a resident for at least 6 months. Only one person who's filing for the divorce has to be a resident of the state for at least 6 months. I would make sure that they're certified, make sure that their certificate is active. You can check on that through the Dispute Resolution Center in the Florida Supreme Court. They have a website and a directory of all of their mediators. You can also see if they've been suspended or have had any ethical issues. The other thing you can do is there are other directories, like there's the Florida Professional Academy of Mediators. They have their own directory too, and then it gives more profile information about their background. There are lots of different types of mediators. So there are attorney mediators, there are therapist mediators, there are mediators that are, more business trained or, financial advisors. So you can come from any of those backgrounds to become a mediator. So I would also think about like, what do you need in your specific situation? Like if you are, co-parenting with somebody with an addiction, or if you have children that are special needs, right? Like you might be looking for a mediator that has some kind of specific knowledge in the area that you need. That's where one of those directories can be a little bit more useful because they give a little bit more bio and background information. So let's go to a few more questions here. Um, how do you decide between collaborative divorce, then having to start all over with mediators and lawyers if collaborative divorce doesn't work? Are you able to provide coaching prior to figuring out which route to go? So, Lee, I know you're part of the collaborative divorce group of Central Florida, right?
Yeah. So I work with people to decide which divorce approach is best. I really encourage people to go work with a mediator first and see if they can mediate like you are talking about pro se and have consulting attorneys. But some people realize that it is too intimidating and they want an attorney, and if that's the case, I really encourage researching and looking into collaborative, because collaborative, the attorneys who gravitate to become collaborative attorneys, their goal is to finish the divorce quickly and amicably. You don't have to have a very amicable relationship with your ex for collaborative to work. But the collaborative attorneys are going into it with the agreement that they will not represent you in court. So it is not in their best interest to have things fall apart, because they're not going to, they can make money and see a result and feel good about themselves and sleep at night, getting you to closure. The other thing is you work with a financial neutral and a mental health neutral. So your parenting plan is done with a therapist present, and you don't have two separate financial affidavits that you each submit to your lawyers and then they have to submit to each other. And that's all the hours you're paying for paralegals to input all this stuff. You have one financial neutral who you both sit down with all your personal documentation, your debts, your assets, and you work with that neutral to help you look at the best way to divide everything up. And then those two attorneys and the financial neutral and the mental health neutral work as a team to help resolve things. So it can be faster, and you are working with people whose goal is to get you to a healthy settlement. It's not to create animosity or escalate or make it so that there's a war between you. I don't know how to describe it in any better way than that. There are a few other benefits with collaborative. Nothing is it's not public information anymore. So a collaborative divorce approach, all of your financial, personal information is kept quiet. So that's one of the benefits a lot of people like with collaborative. But I really think that if you are considering hiring attorneys, I would explore that avenue. I think it has very positive results. And the type of attorneys you're working with are high quality attorneys who have been litigators for a long time and have seen how ugly it can get. And they move towards the collaborative approach because they believe it's just a better approach for the families.
Mhm. That's great. Thank you. Okay, we have a question about have either one of you done work with senior citizens married over 45 years? So I'll say personally for me, I have worked with some clients that have long-term marriages and children who are adults. So I will say the one thing that is simplified in a senior citizen divorce is there's no parenting plan. So there's no more negotiating about adult children. I mean, unless you have a child that is still dependent for some reason, like if you have a disabled child who's an adult but still dependent, that could be an exception. But for the most part, with senior citizens, it's just about a settlement agreement. I mean, that is the one piece that pulls everything together to file an agreement for an uncontested divorce. So, I mean, a settlement agreement is really going to be the same. It's going to be the same categories that we talk about.
Mhm.
We'll still go through all the bank accounts, all the credit cards, any loans, any property. We'll talk about taxes. We'll talk about pensions. I mean, so there are still, to me, it's the same categories that we talk about. It's just that the numbers and the allocations might end up different, right? So, what about you, Lee?
Well, so the one thing is just to recognize what they call gray divorce, but divorces over 50, age 55, long-term marriages are the fastest group of divorces that are happening today. And I think the emotional aspects of gray divorce are a little different than the things that you experience and focus on in your 30s and 40s. You don't have kids in the home anymore, and there's this whole history behind you, which I mean, even I divorced in my 40s, but I'd been with my ex for 23 years. So it still was a huge chunk of life, but it's a whole different situation when your kids have grown. And so you're starting the whole splitting process without you're going to like a totally empty household when you split apart. So there are unique aspects that tend to probably be more related to the emotional aspect and less of the nuts and bolts of divorce, practical aspects.
So, Lee, we're already at time. That flew by really fast, and
Good.
not just because I got kicked out for a minute. Do you want to give any last piece of advice or tips before we wrap up? I want to let you all know we're both offering a discount for people that attended this webinar. So hang on to us for a couple more minutes while we wrap up, and we'll share that with you.
Yeah. I guess to just wrap up, I would say that divorce is a very difficult season of life, but it's temporary and you get through it. Having support is really important. And recognizing that there is beautiful things that happen post divorce. There's so much self-development and growth and new opportunities that would never have come your way. And so it's not better or worse, they're just different. And if you can create a story in your mind that helps you set the intention for what your future you want your future to look like, it can make the healing process happen a little faster. So I think divorce is not easy. I would never sugarcoat it, but there are better and worse ways to go through divorce, to get divorced. And when you have good professionals alongside you, it can help the whole process go smoother and have that healing take place faster.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think of divorce as having three phases. There's one phase while you're still married and you're considering divorce.
Mhm.
Then there's that decision point that kicks off the actual divorce process. And then there's the post-divorce process. So, I
Yes.
mean, for me, the part leading up to divorce was the hardest. That was about a 3-year period of just thinking, should I do this or not? So that was a long period of time that was very difficult.
Yeah.
To me, once I made the decision, not that that was easy, but it was like the agonizing over the decision was the hardest.
Yeah.
Then from the decision to the divorce, that's like the limbo period. And
Hmm.
limbo is very hard for, you know, somebody like me who likes to be in control of things. Like that's
Yeah.
very hard for me to deal with that transitional period. It was,
Yeah.
I sold my house, I moved, I didn't know what anything looked like anymore. And so that's a very hard period of time too, but it's finite. It's
Yeah.
like this one little chapter. You hope it's faster than than not, but it could be a couple years even of that transition time. Once you
Hmm.
get that final divorce, man, it feels like a celebration as an order. I know that like a lot of people think it's weird if I tell them congratulations when they get divorced, but it's like congratulations, you made it through the two hardest phases. And it
Exactly.
really does always get better. Like it's just
Hmm.
been so much better ever since then. So just, I tell people, hang in there and take care of yourself as much as you can because there's only so much of this process that you can control. You really can
Hmm.
only control what your own actions and reactions are, right? You're
Exactly.
never going to control the other person in the situation. You can't even control your kids, let's be honest. Like they have their own thoughts and opinions about it the whole way through, too. So, I mean, all you can do is try to protect your own peace and try to take
Hmm.
care of yourself through the process to get through it as unscathed as you can. But it
Yeah.
definitely gets better.
It does. It does. And that stay or go process that you were talking about, it is really challenging. And I feel like the clients who came to me in that phase, they had enough time to make the right decisions for themselves with some support so that when they did start the divorce process, they were in the right mindset and had a lot of information. So I think even in that stay or go phase, getting some help, just a sounding board with someone who is informed is definitely worthwhile.
Absolutely. And I'll say as a mediator, try to be the de-escalator of the relationship.
Mhm.
Try to be the one that doesn't escalate issues beyond where they need to go. Try to be that de-escalator.
Yeah.
And I have tactics to do that too, so I can always talk you through that as well. So we have reached the end of our webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. I wanted to put this information on the screen. Please feel free to stay in touch with us. If you have questions that you didn't want to ask in this setting, and you would rather have a one-on-one conversation with us, please reach out to us. So we both have our websites here. My business is called Quarter Tone Mediation. It's at qtmediation.com. And Lee's website can be found at leewrightcoaching.com. We have our phone numbers here, our social media handles, and then we each came up with an offer for you all tonight. So I'm going to be offering $100 off. If you book a 3-hour mediation session with me, I'll take off $100. And for Lee, she's going to be offering 20% off a 3-session package. So all you have to do is just mention that you were at this webinar, and we're happy to give you those offers. I also offer free consultations, so you can go to my website and book a free consultation. So 15 minutes, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. You've pretty much heard my spiel now, so you kind of know what I do. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have. Lee, anything else before we wrap up tonight?
I'll just say I also do free consultations, and you can go to my website and schedule those as well.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and for joining me tonight. And everybody, thanks for coming, and we wish you all the best in 2025. There's better things coming your way.
Yeah.
So don't be
Thank
scared.
you.
It's going to
Good
get better
luck.
from here. Good
You
luck,
will make
everyone.
it through. Bye.